Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Lee Applebaum, Chief Marketing Officer at Patron Spirits. In addition to having one of the coolest jobs in marketing and being a headliner in my book, The CMO's Periodic Table, he is the winner of the CMO Club's Award for Creativity and Storytelling, a couple of my favorite topics. Welcome, Lee.
Yeah, thanks. It's a real pleasure to join you.
So I have this theory, and you and I have talked a little bit about that there's, a little bit of a renegade in every senior marketer, and I know that being the CMO of Patron, that may apply to you. So what's one way that you're a renegade?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I certainly understand the context in which you talk about being a renegade. I think given the very interesting political times, I looked up the literal definition of a renegade. So a person who deserts and betrays an organization, country, or set of principles. Someone who has treacherously changed allegiance. And so I'm careful about ever saying that I'm a renegade these days because of where it may lead. But I think in your case, right, we're really talking about nonconformists, about marketing disruptors. And I think that although we're a spirits brand, we think about ourselves, and I think the consumer views us in a broader context, one of luxury brand and luxury brand marketing. And so for us, I think being a renegade, and me specifically, it's about challenging longstanding norms in luxury, and I guess more specifically in spirits marketing. And principally, I think what that means, at least at a high level, is a lot of luxury brand marketing is brilliant fiction storytelling, which is fine. And I think it's beautiful, and they tell a beautiful story, and people are buying into that story at great expense. For me, I think the real renegade positioning, the way in which I'm trying to really lead a nonconformist organization, is about having 100% transparency in the marketing that we do. We have no proverbial wizard, behind the curtain, nothing to hide. Cliche, but we sort of open our kimono fully. We fully drop it. Many luxury brands don't do that because so much of their story is one of fiction, and very romantic fiction at best. We have a real benefit with our brand that we can be completely transparent. We have a very honest, artisanal, handmade product. And so this idea of being as transparent, as open, as honest as possible, talking about our product that way, certainly in a way that's still upscale, is something that, believe it or not, is not done often in luxury. And I think it's a reason that there's so much skepticism now in the luxury sector with consumers around exactly what is fact and what is fiction. How much am I buying into just a clever advertising proposition?
It's such an interesting answer, and I have to first tell you a story. So when Renegade was initially a group within Dentsu, and when I proposed the name, our full name was Renegade Marketing Group. The Japanese got their dictionary out, and the only word in the dictionary, because it was outlaw, and they said, "Wait, what?" And so I had to do some homework on definitions, and we pulled out broader definitions. And yes, one definition of a renegade is an outlaw, but the second definition gets to someone who thinks differently from convention, and therefore we were able to sell the name. But anyway, so I know what it means, and you're right about using definitions carefully these days. So, I also think your notion of that having 100% transparency in a luxury brand is a fascinating thought, because you're right. I mean, so often it's, that we're in this image is everything world where, a $25,000 bag, which costs $11 worth of goods and services, you start to wonder, where that real value is. So I'm curious, and we talked a little bit about this in the past, but what's as you're going about looking at both, I'll call them traditional channels, whether it's print or TV or outdoor, what are some of the non-traditional channels that you found to be particularly effective for Patron and your other brands?
Yeah, I think particularly in spirits, they've very traditionally relied heavily on your usual bag of above the line tricks, as you said. So TV, print, out of home, and these are still very, very important. I think they're important on their own merits. I think certainly within spirits, important for us with a 70% market share in the ultra premium tequila sector, with 98 to 99% brand awareness, very high consideration numbers. We don't have to fight that sort of above the line awareness challenge. And so we continue to rely in part in the mix with those traditional media tactics. But in the last several years have really shifted the focus to more, as you said, non-traditional channels. I think one which maybe these days isn't so much non-traditional, maybe it's even considered traditional, is social media. But we use it a little bit differently. I think for us, social media is a channel that we use to harness, curate, and amplify an organic consumer conversation. So what do I mean by that? I think, again, many brands use social media, and we do to an extent, for taking proprietary content, so produced content, and syndicating it at a relatively low cost, at least relative to traditional ATL. And we do that. However, for us, as we are fighting this battle around authenticity and again, around transparency, we see that there's an organic conversation going on already, one that we don't need to produce, we don't need to create. It's going on within the trade, so mixologists and bartenders, with restaurateurs, with spirits writers, with people in luxury brands, and ultimately with consumers, talking about the experiences that they've had with our brand. Most of them, fortunately, very good experiences. In some cases, experiences that aren't necessarily bad, but experiences that give us an opportunity to either participate in the conversation, to correct misperceptions about the brand, or to have a conversation about it. And so we're really relying heavily on social media, as I said, to help curate a conversation. I think a couple of years ago, the quote unquote haters would get on social media and talk about our brand as this sort of swagger only brand with no substance. So it was all style, or at least they alleged that. And we'd have to enter these conversations and explain at great lengths why that wasn't true. But, the irony is sort of the harder you work to market yourself, the less genuine you appear. I mean, that's sort of the double-edged sword. Now, leveraging social media, we let those conversations happen organically. We let other mixologists comment on our behalf, mixologists who have had exposure to our brand, whether it is through trade ambassadors or those who potentially may have visited our hacienda in Mexico to share their experiences that they've had with our brand, to change those misperceptions and have that conversation for us, which is more real, more authentic than anything we can accomplish in advertising.
It's really true. If you can get your advocates to speak on behalf of the brand, it's just so much more meaningful than what you talk about, what you say. I'm curious as we sort of wrap up this segment, because it is hard, even with a brand like Patron, with the budget and the share, it's hard to get your messages to stand out. What's the one thing you do to make sure that your marketing as a whole cuts through?
Yeah, that's a great question. We enjoy, as I said, a very dominant market share. We're a brand that, particularly in the United States, is a loved brand, and there is so much natural, organic conversation going on around it. I think for us, innovation is part of in the fabric of really the DNA of the brand. I mean, we created the ultra premium tequila category, and we continue to lead it. I think for us, it's about harnessing marketing programs, tactics, tools, technologies to continue to showcase that innovation. So it's things like we were one of the very first brands that leveraged Oculus VR, but did it in a way that was different than other brands that were using Oculus, say, purely for entertainment. I use Mountain Dew as an example. They did a brilliant Oculus VR program where you were sort of this virtual skateboarder, because no disrespect to Mountain Dew. I mean, it's a remarkable brand, but at the end of the day, it's green sugar water, right? There's not a lot of substance there. I think for us, we were one of the first brands to use a technology like Oculus to, again, I go back to open that kimono, tell the transparent story, give consumers an inside view of what happens in our distillery, to tell that brand story in an innovative yet entertaining way. And so I think for us, it's always staying ahead of the curve, being innovative, and never resting on our laurels. I think it's easy when you have the kind of share that we have, when you enjoy the kind of brand equity that we have, to become a bit lazy. But we've all seen brands much bigger with much greater share, disappear in a matter of years, whether that's a retail or a CPG or a luxury brand, especially with very fickle consumers.
Those are all such great points. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about what state-of-the-art marketing is, some of the things that maybe Lee sees coming down the pike that he's excited about. So stay tuned.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
Okay, we're back with Lee Applebaum, Chief Marketing Officer of Patron Spirits. Lee, let's talk about state-of-the-art marketing. I mean, one of the big issues right now is idea versus data, and it's not really a versus, but, marketers are spending more and more on marketing technology. What's state-of-the-art as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on a couple important themes. I mean, I touched on earlier the fact that I talked about social media being non-traditional, and now in a matter of years, it's become, I think, very traditional. I mentioned things like the use of VR and AR, which are tactics, but I think are very clearly state-of-the-art, cutting-edge ways for marketers to engage in storytelling, whether that storytelling is fiction or, in our case, nonfiction. You touched on another theme that I think is really important. In this era of big data, we as marketers have more insights than ever, more data and power, I think, than ever to harness that data. But I think it's come at the cost of some true great gut level instinctive marketing. If I think about when I left graduate school I'm dating myself, but in the early 90s, there was a transition going on. I think it was moving away. Obviously, I'm a little older than the Mad Men era, thankfully, but it was moving away from that, pure right brain, creative, gut level, aesthetic marketer to a smarter marketer. And I think that was a positive move. Unfortunately, I think the pendulum's gone so far that, and meaning no disrespect to the importance of an education, but I think now we see marketing departments full of PhDs that look strictly at the data and ignore the gut instinct. And the interesting thing is, for all the data that we now have, which is remarkable, for all the behavioral data that we get from things like real-time experiences in digital and social media, and our ability to crunch that data and cut that data and call that data and act on the data, consumers haven't fundamentally changed. I mean, the media we consume has changed. We have new, more media than ever. The phone has moved from the third screen to maybe the first screen, arguably. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings, right? We evolve over millions of years, not over just a year or two. But we're acting like suddenly human beings have become far more complex and do things vastly differently. And I don't think that's the case. And it's a bit alarming to me, quite honestly, that we've lost in some way that very instinctive touch, which has created some of the most not only impactful marketing, but some of the most sustainable marketing and built some of the best brands that survive and thrive today. And my hope is that over time we move back to a balance, as all pendulums eventually kind of hang in the middle unless pushed one way or the other, that we see a real balance of left brain and right brain, and state of the art really becomes as much about data as it does a true art. And that art is something which I think you don't really learn in school. I think it's something you learn only practically engaging with consumers and looking at the way that they engage with your brand.
Yeah, it's such an interesting area, and I've had lots of conversations now about this fine line, and I do think you're right that particularly for a brand like Patron, where the art is built into the brand. I mean, you're an artisanally made brand, and so making sure that story stays fresh and alive. Sure, it could be informed perhaps by data, but that story has to be presented. It has to be romanced, and there's lots of decisions that you can make that probably a bot's not going to help you make. So I'm curious, as you look and try to stay informed on the business and looking for, particularly with the way MarTech is evolving and changing, how do you what's one resource that you look to sort of stay current, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we're very fortunate in that we're resource rich in our organization. I often joke. We've got far more data, far more resources than we can actually act on, and I think that's actually true for a lot of organizations. There's more. I'm a big advocate of consumer research. Please don't think even my prior comments suggest otherwise. But I do think that there's this need for organizations to increasingly become smarter and smarter. But what they lack is the ability, whether that's bandwidth, whether that's organizational capacity, I don't know what it is, but the ability to actually act on that data or to act on those insights. We spend a fair amount of time as an organization looking at what other world-class brands are doing, certainly. But at the end of the day, nothing replaces spending time with our consumers, whether that is in the on-trade. So for us in restaurants and bars, we have an interesting job where we actually get paid to hang out in bars and justify it. But we spend a lot of time looking at the way in which real-time consumers are engaging with our product and our brands. There's no substitute for doing that. But again, I think we've got so much data, so much information today that we're just unable to act on. I think we've probably got 5+ years worth of information, assuming that there are no major trend changes before we need to become richer in more.
Amazing. That's really interesting. And I can having experience, at least having been a bartender at some CMO club sessions, I can speak to the fact that this research that Lee has done in bars has paid off, and he's quite skilled in the art of Patron drink making. So yeah, which is that's a skill as well, and important. I mean, you have to embrace your brands and live your brand. So more power to you. So let's as we wrap this up, what's the toughest lesson you've learned when it comes to marketing?
I think it's this idea. I mean, it's an age-long principle, this idea of keep it simple. And I think that, it's kind of a recurring theme, marketers thankfully are getting smarter. I mean that intellectually, in the last several years, whether it's supported by things like big data. But as I said, I don't think the consumer has fundamentally changed a whole lot. And we tend to overcomplicate things. I look at things like consumer segmentation and, models that at one time had 4 or 5 segments now have 50, 60 micro segments. And we dissect them to a point where we've really lost the core essence of the brand and what we're trying to accomplish. And I think we've overcomplicated it. And in doing so, we throw a lot of money and a lot of organizational resources, a lot of capital, at trying to overcomplicate what can be simple. So I think, they talk about EQ and IQ, and I think high IQ marketers need a little more EQ and really need to take a step back and simplify what we do, whether that's messaging, whether that's media, whether it's the way in which we think about consumer behavior. And it's not sexy. And I think in some ways it's counterintuitive when we're trying to prove to a CEO or to a board of directors or even to our peers when we're trying to justify whether it's our jobs or why we or our departments need more money. I think we tend to think that the smarter we are, the more we throw against the wall, the more we justify that. And I think in some ways, the simpler we can make things, the easier. And not only the easier in terms of our effectiveness as marketers, but I think also we become more effective in galvanizing our organizations internally around, how do we rally around a brand, a product, a marketing campaign, or a positioning. And so, I think this idea of keeping it simple, and I have to challenge myself all the time because fundamentally, I think we all like to prove how smart we are. And in doing that, it just feels like more is better. And I think more is not always better.
So I thought this was a really interesting conversation because we covered a lot of really important things. I mean, Lee ended talking about keeping things simple. And one of the things I've said a lot over the years and determined over the years that simple is incredibly hard because simple is based on a real insight and that leads to an idea that can encompass a broad range of thinking. So don't confuse getting to simple with easy, because it's the opposite. So one of the ways that Lee, I think spoke to a lot of marketers is, first of all, think about bucking the category. Lee talked about how the spirits category tends to be a lot of smoke and mirrors, the luxury category, and he instead aimed Patron straight at authenticity and transparency to tell the story of how Patron is an artisanal brand, handcrafted, and all those good things that end up creating the quality that is Patron. And so as we're moving now, we've got this authenticity and transparency, but it's important as a brand that you think about innovation, particularly a brand when you're leading the category. You need to keep innovating or people sort of stop thinking about you. And one of the ways you can innovate and show that you're an innovative brand is through your marketing, not just through your product development. So Lee talked about the need to do things like Oculus and be there early. And instead of doing what Mountain Dew did, which was sort of tell this fluffy story, if you will, entertaining story, they decided to focus in on the brand. We talked a fair amount about this battle between data and how too much data can be paralyzing, and how it is important to find the right data. That solution is not easy. No one has really truly figured that out. I think the point here for you is you need some data, no doubt about it. Science is really important in this, but if you're overly dependent on the data, you are likely to make smaller decisions, rational decisions that could be helpful, but may not get you to that big idea. And if we talk about the big idea in terms of the essence of a brand and how important that is, not just to your customers, which we've talked about as being front and center, but to your employees and having them be able to rally around a simple, authentic, unique story. Again, simple is hard. Lee, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Renegade Thinkers Unite. I certainly learned a lot, and I really appreciate you sharing what you've learned.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.